Hi, this is Jenny. Thank you so much for tuning in for another segment of My Uneducation, unraveling the Minneapolis Police Department's 150-year history and looking for a new path forward. So to this point, we have looked at the history of racism and brutality in the Minneapolis Police Department. The problems within the department have survived multiple oversight committees and councils, various city councils, lots of different mayors, lots of different police chiefs, and overall police conduct has never varied from its roots in racism and brutality. It is officially time for a hard reboot. So what does it mean when people say they want to defund the police? It means taking away money and resources from the police department and putting them into other areas of our community that will also prevent crime. The most recent budget that was passed by the city of Minneapolis for the police was $193 million. So we are nearing the $200 million mark. In 2016, they invested $500,000 in a community building effort for the Little Earth and Broadway communities in Minneapolis. Now imagine if we shaved away even just 10% of the current budget and put $19 million towards community resources. We can make a huge impact in the other resources that would be available in communities. So let's break down the three big functions of police. One is to maintain order. The second is to respond to crisis. And the third is bringing criminals to justice. So let's break these down and see what solutions we can come up with that would replace a police response. So the first one, maintaining order. Our criminal justice system in this country is built on the idea that crime is a form of individual misbehavior and that the only way to prevent crime is to put bad guys who commit crimes into jails. And yet social science research tells us that most crime is committed as a result of poverty and marginalization. Retired Minneapolis Police Chief Tony Buzza once said, "The idea of police as crime preventers is rubbish. By the time the cop appears, the criminal has been formed and the crime committed." So prior to the pandemic, unemployment in the Twin Cities was at an all-time low. And yet, unemployment among those living in the Powderhorn Park neighborhood was still nearly 3 times that of people living in my neighborhood, or 6.3% versus 2.6%. As we know, not all jobs are equal, which is also relevant by the 60% income gap between the people living in my neighborhood and that of Powderhorn Park. In July of 2019, the city of Minneapolis increased the minimum wage to $11 per hour for small businesses, those employing 50 or fewer people, and $12.25 per hour for large employers. And yet a full-time job that pays just $11 per hour will gross an individual $22,880 a year. Just imagine, so for people who don't live in the city of Minneapolis, the cost of housing alone in the city is prohibitive of being able to make it on that salary. People who work in affordable housing and agencies that are helping to support low-income people in this area have something that they call a cost burden of housing. In my neighborhood, we call it being house poor, where more than 1/3 of your monthly income is going towards the cost of your housing, be it rent or a mortgage. So if someone is working a full-time job, making $11 an hour, in order to have their rent not take up more than 1/3 of their income, they have to find a place to rent that costs $630 per month or less. Anything over $630, and they are officially cost burdened with the cost of housing. Just take a little walk through Zillow. I did that yesterday. Zillow.com is a real estate site. It does all kinds of things. One, it shows you homes that are for sale, but outside of that, it also gives you values on homes, has pulled in all of the information on year built, property taxes, and all of that kind of information. If you look at zip code 55407 and zoom in on the Powderhorn Park neighborhood, you will see that getting an apartment for $630 or less is just out of the question. The cheapest one that I saw was a studio, not even a 1-bedroom, that was asking $875 per month. A 2-bedroom, which would probably work for a family, was $1,667 per month. So definitely not affordable housing for people making minimum wage. While the city has been working to increase wages, the more effective way to close this gap is to create more affordable, subsidized housing for low-income workers that they can actually afford. This is one area where monies previously spent on policing would be directed. Another piece of this pie is the cost of childcare. Minnesota has the fourth most expensive childcare in the nation. I know people who literally the minute they found out they were expecting started looking for childcare because spaces are few and far between. There is not enough to meet the needs, and that plays out even more so when you can't afford the very expensive costs of childcare. The average childcare center in Minnesota costs $1,341 per month for an infant. If you were to go to an in-home daycare center or an in-home care, the cost for that same infant is $706 per month. Now, why the disparity, you ask? One of the reasons is in-home care, they basically take a week of vacation where you know you don't have childcare for that week. If they or their own children are sick, they close for the day. And you as working parents have no options, perhaps, but to take the day off to care for your children. When our girls were young, Wayne and I had absolutely no family living in the Twin Cities. Now we do, but at the time we had no one we could call on. There was no grandma, no aunt, no retired person that would watch our kids for a day if the daycare closed. So we had no choice but to pay the more expensive childcare center rates so that they could be open. So if a childcare provider was sick, they simply called a different employee and asked them to come into work that day, even though they hadn't been scheduled, so that we could have childcare available to us 5 days a week. So let's go back to that person making $11 an hour, shall we? Even if they could find an in-home childcare spot, that expense would still eat up 37% of their monthly gross income. Now, Minnesota does have subsidized childcare for low-income employees, but it is woefully underfunded, with childcare providers receiving payments only worth 16 to 23% of the value of the care they provide, depending on if it's in a center or in-home. Because of this, very few places have places available for people who need subsidized childcare. They may only allocate 10% of the spots in a center for people who need subsidized care because they can't afford to receive that low of payments. The state of Minnesota is actually in danger of getting fined significantly by the federal government for not reimbursing childcare centers at an appropriate rate. It is woefully underfunded. So investing in more affordable childcare is critical to these low-income families. Let's, again, take some of this money away from policing and instead put it towards affordable and accessible childcare. But as Greg Boyle, founder of Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles, put it, nothing stops a bullet like a job. There are a lot of nonprofits on the ground in Minneapolis, providing workforce training, education, and more to help people move from homelessness to hopefulness and improve their lives through improved livelihood. And yet many people have to hold down 2 or 3 jobs in order to make ends meet because of the expensive rents and childcare. When would they have time to do training to be able to find better paying jobs? So fixing the first two, affordable housing and affordable childcare, will help with this one. But there is also a gap where nonprofits are doing their best to provide these resources, but there are more people who need jobs training than there are nonprofits doing the work. Let's take some of this $193 million a year and divert it to these nonprofits so they can give them the resource and expand their work so they can support more people. Okay. So the last function of police, responding to crisis. Sadly, lots of people don't remember the mid-1980s. A lot of people watching this may have been born in the mid-1980s or after that. I do remember the 1980s. I do remember the time before 911. The 911 system was only brought to this city in the mid-80s. Too much skepticism. Community members were skeptical that they could call just one number and a dispatcher would know which of several emergency responses was needed, police, fire, or medical. And ironically, with the exception of fires, typically police respond first, even when a medical assist is what was requested. One community member in Minneapolis, Robin Garwood, recently told a story via Twitter of calling the police when a disoriented and incoherent person literally walked into his house. He and his friend were just leaving, and this person tried to walk in as if he lived there. Now, this happened during the pandemic. It was earlier. I know this is hard to believe because right now, as I record this, it's a 90-degree day. But during this very same pandemic, we had snow and we had bitterly cold temperatures about 2 months ago. So Robin and his friend kept this person on the porch, gave him water and a towel to keep warm because it was cold out and it was supposed to snow later. This guy didn't seem to know that there was a pandemic going on. He attempted to shake both of their hands multiple times. He was unable to form any words. They tried to ask his name, where he was from, where he needed to go. They couldn't figure out, was he drunk? Was he having a diabetic event? Had he suffered a brain injury? Had he been in an accident? They didn't know what the issues were. Finally, they figured that they couldn't help him anymore, and Robin called 911. He specifically asked for an ambulance, and the dispatcher said, more than likely what you're going to get are police. He said he did not want a police response, but a police response is indeed what they got. The two officers who arrived were very dismissive of the two Good Samaritans who were trying to help this guy. They spoke to the two gentlemen briefly, then said they needed to take the incoherent person into their car for a private conversation, as I said. So they took this person into the backseat of the squad car, appeared to speak with him for a few moments, and then drove off with him without saying a word to the two gentlemen who were there trying to help him. So after this happened, it took Robin multiple calls over several days to find out what had happened to this person. Finally, he was informed that the cops dropped him off at 38th and Minnehaha because that's where he said he wanted to be dropped off. Robin found this really hard to believe, considering that the man could not form two words when he was speaking with them just minutes before the cops arrived. And this person was also dropped off near dark, wearing just a t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers, with a forecast of snow for the night. Now, his Twitter thread goes on to imagine what would have happened had an ambulance arrived first. Probably they would have assessed this person and tried to figure out what his issues were. If they couldn't figure it out, he would have gotten a ride to the emergency room, some testing, some treatment to help him regain his senses. And certainly he would have gotten a warm place to be for the night. Now imagine a 911 where you get exactly the help you need. Unlike what you see in TV, cops rarely, if ever, stop crimes in progress. Usually they show up after the place has been robbed, the rape committed, to gather evidence and take statements. And don't get me started on the 1,700 untested rape kits that the Minneapolis Police Department found in November of 2019. They are failing us in stopping crime, they are failing us in responding to crisis, and they are failing us in bringing justice. To that end, their third large responsibility is criminal justice. In 2015, there were 45 murders in the city of Minneapolis. We're looking back at 2015 right now because there have been 5 years that have passed for these crimes to get solved. And 5 years later, only 26 of them have been solved. As I mentioned previously, only 1% of rapes result in a conviction. The majority of property crimes in Minneapolis also go unsolved. The police are so mistrusted in the communities that they are supposed to help that witnesses will not come forward. So instead of trying to police and trying to make the police work better and ignoring the racism and playing down the brutality, let's instead look to other models to solve crime. Native American communities have age-old transformative justice practices that we can use as a model. Even restorative justice agencies in the Twin Cities can be tasked with addressing community conflict outside of the courtroom. As the writer of the MPD 150 says in this segment, we could not design a more inhumane, racist, damaging way to resolve conflict than the United States penal system if we tried. In the next segment, we will be looking at what solutions the MPD 150 report imagines, things that can take the place of a police response. Not only would these solutions have the opportunity to reduce crime, but also to make our entire community more equitable and a happier place to be. Thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned for the next segment on other options. Thank you.